When Stuart got home from the boat race, his mother made him some hot broth and put him to bed in his cigarette box with a doll's hot water bottle against his feet. Even so, Stuart caught a bad cold, and this turned into bronchitis, and Stuart had to stay in bed for almost 2 weeks. During his illness, the other members of the family were extremely kind to Stuart. Mrs. Little played tic-tac-toe with him. George made him the clay soap bubble pipe that he'd promised him 2 years ago, and a thimbleful of soapy water for blowing bubbles. Mr. Little gave Stuart a handsome pair of ice skates. He had made them himself out of 2 paper clips and a doll's leather shoelaces. Well, hello, Stuart called to the bird on his windowsill. Who are you? Where did you come from? My name is Margalo, she answered. I come from fields once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. I come from vales of meadowsweet, and I love to whistle. Stuart was so amazed he stood bolt upright in his bed. Say that again, he said. I can't, replied Margalo. I have a sore throat. Oh, that's too bad, said Stuart. I have a sore throat, too. I've got bronchitis. You'd better not get too near me. You might catch it. I'll sit right here, said Margalo. You can use some of my gargle if you want to, said Stuart. And my nose drops, and I have plenty of cough drops, too. Thank you very much. You're very kind, replied the bird. Did you take your temperature, asked Stuart, who was beginning to be genuinely worried about his new friend's health. It's not necessary, said Margalo. Well, we better make sure, said Stuart, because I would hate to have anything happen to you. So Margalo put the thermometer under her tongue, and she and Stuart sat very still for 3 minutes. Then she took it out and looked at it slowly and carefully. Normal, she announced. Stuart felt his heart leap for gladness. It seemed to him that he had never seen any creature so beautiful as his gentle bird, and he already loved her. I like the way you've done your room very much, commented Margalo. Thank you, replied Stuart modestly. I rather enjoy it. It's a nice place for a city location. You could sleep in the Boston fern on the bookshelf in the living room if you'd like. Thank you, said Margalo. And if you don't mind, I think I'll go to bed now. I always go to bed at sundown. Good night, sir. Please don't call me sir, cried Stuart. Call me Stuart. Very well, said the bird. Good night, Stuart. Stuart couldn't seem to go to sleep. He kept thinking about Margalo and the fern plant. He kept thinking about Snowbell's gleaming eyes. There's just something in me that doesn't trust a cat. I can't sleep knowing Margalo is in danger. He stole to the living room, shinnied up the lamp cord out onto the bookshelf and up to the book tops. There was a faint ray of light from the street lamp outside, and Stuart could dimly see Margalo safely snuggled in the fern. Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast, he whispered, repeating a speech he had heard in the movies. Then he set watch, high above a souvenir Dutch wooden shoe, waiting and listening. For hours he saw nothing, heard nothing but the faint ruffle of Margalo's wings when she waked from a dream. Then the clock struck 1 loudly, and before the sound of the stroke had died away, Stuart saw 2 gleaming yellow eyes. He jumped down behind the wooden shoe. Stuart was frightened, but he was a brave mouse. Snowbell reached up noiselessly toward the Boston fern. Stuart decided the time had come. This is the finest thing I've ever done, thought Stuart, and he pushed the wooden shoe straight at the cat. A direct hit, said Stuart, as a startled Snowbell ran off toward the kitchen. Thank heaven, said Stuart. There's a good night's work done. And he threw a kiss toward a grateful Margalo. Margalo liked it so well at the Littles' house, she decided to stay for a while instead of returning to the open country. She and Stuart watched the ball games together, and they soon became fast friends. As the days passed, it seemed to Stuart that she grew more and more beautiful. He hoped she would never go away from him. One fine morning, Stuart put on his turtleneck sweater, took his new skates, and set out to look for an ice pond. He didn't get far. The minute he reached the street, he saw an English sheepdog. So he had to hide in the coil of an old bed spring someone had set out for the junk man. While he was there, waiting for the dog to go away, a truck drove up to the curb. The driver picked up the spring and loaded it onto the big junk truck. If I jump now, I'll kill myself, thought Stuart. So he stayed in the coil, and the truck started to rumble away. We're going east, he said to himself. I wonder what that means. When the truck arrived at the East River, which borders New York City on the east, and which is a rather dirty but useful river, the driver drove up to the pier and backed up to a junk scow. As Stuart looked down at it, he thought, I bet I'm going to be sick at my stomach before I get out of this. Just then, the driver started to dump his load. Stuart went crashing with a spring and hit his head so hard he fainted and lay quite still as though he were dead. He lay that way for almost an hour. When he recovered his senses, he looked about him. The scow was being towed out to sea. Well, thought Stuart, this is about the worst thing that could happen to anybody. I guess this will be my last ride in this world, for he knew that he would be towed 20 miles out and dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. I guess there's nothing I can do about it, he thought hopelessly. I'll just have to wait here bravely and die like a man. This thought made him sad, and he began to think of his home, and of his parents and brother, and of Margalo and Snowbell, and of how he loved them all but Snowbell. He was sobbing when a small voice behind him whispered, Stuart? Margalo, cried Stuart through his tears. How did you get here? Well, said the bird, I was looking out the window this morning, and I happened to see you get dumped onto the truck. So I flew out the window and followed you, thinking you might need some help. I've never been so glad to see anyone in all my life, said Stuart. But how are you going to help me? I think that if you'll hang onto my feet, I can fly ashore with you, said Margalo. How much do you weigh? 5 ounces, said Stuart. With your clothes on, asked Margalo. Certainly, replied Stuart modestly. Then I believe I can carry you all right. I'll circle about you to get up speed, she called. Take a firm grip on my ankles. With a flutter of wings, Margalo rose into the sky, carrying Stuart along. I feel dizzy, Stuart called up to Margalo. Then don't look down, she replied. Suppose I get sick at my stomach. You'll just have to be sick. Anything is better than death. Yes, that's true, Stuart agreed. Isn't there something you could drop to make yourself lighter, the bird called? Well, I could drop my ice skates, said Stuart. Goodness me, his dear friend cried. I didn't know you still had your skates over your shoulder. Toss those heavy skates away or we'll both come down in the ocean and perish. So Stuart threw them away. That's better, said Margalo. Now we're all right. And together they flew high over the water and headed toward home. I can see the towers and chimneys of New York, called Margalo. We're safe now. As they approached Manhattan, Margalo changed course. I think we should take the water route, she called. It's more scenic. As they flew along high over the Hudson River, Stuart sighed and hoped his father would be able to get away from business one day, long enough to see all these fine things and feel the rush of wind in his face and hear the sound of silence in his ears. We're almost there, Margalo shouted. I see our TV antenna. 2 seconds later, she flew down toward the Littles' home, through the open living room window, and gently landed Stuart on the Boston Fern. Mrs. Little, who had left the window up when she missed Margalo, was glad to see them back, for she was beginning to worry. Everyone thanked Margalo for saving Stuart's life, and at supper time, Mrs. Little presented her with a cupcake, which had seeds sprinkled on top. Later that year, when spring came to the land, Margalo was enjoying a fine early morning sunbath on the living room windowsill, where Mrs. Little had placed her fern plant. She was thinking how good all the Littles were to her when she spied a note tucked in the branch of her fern. She hopped down to read it. It said, "Beware of strange cat who will come by night." It was signed, "A well-wisher." She kept the note hidden under her wing all that day, wondering what she had better do. But she didn't show it to anyone, not even to Stuart, who tried to get her to eat her favorite celery heart leaf. But she couldn't eat. She was so frightened. "What had I better do?" she kept saying to herself. Finally, just before dark, without saying a word to anyone, not even to Stuart, she flew away. It was springtime, and she flew north just as fast as she could fly, because something inside her told her that north was the way for a bird to go when spring comes to the land. Stuart was heartbroken. He had no appetite, refused food, even his favorite cake, and lost weight. Finally, he decided he would run away from home without telling anyone and go out into the world and look for Margalo. Before daybreak next morning, he got out his biggest handkerchief, and in it he placed his things. He pulled a strand of hair from Mrs. Little's comb to have something to remember his mother by, then laid it in the handkerchief with his other things. Stuart rolled everything up into a bundle, tied it onto one end of a toothpick, slung the pack over his shoulder, and stole softly out of the house. "Goodbye, my beautiful home," he whispered. "I wonder if I will ever see you again." The world was a big place in which to go looking for a lost bird. Which way should he go? North? South? East or west? Stuart decided to ask the advice of his friend, Dr. Carey, the surgeon-dentist, owner of the schooner Wasp. "Which direction do you think I should start out in?" Stuart asked. "What color is the bird?" Dr. Carey questioned. "Cocoa," said Stuart. "Better go north," said the doctor. "Don't you think so, Mr. Clydesdale?" "Ook in entro ark," said the patient. "What?" cried Stuart. "I ook in entro ark," said Mr. Clydesdale. "He says, look in Central Park," explained Dr. Carey. "It's a good suggestion. Oftentimes, people with decayed teeth have sound ideas." Later, Dr. Carey asked Stuart, "How are you traveling, on foot?" "Yes, sir," said Stuart. "Well, I think you'd better have a car," replied the doctor. "Let's see what can be done about it." "I enjoy building model cars and boats when I'm not extracting teeth. I made this one myself." It was the most perfect miniature automobile Stuart had ever seen. It was a bright red with chrome trim, a streamlined, classy convertible of graceful design. It has a real gasoline motor in it and a good deal of power. "Do you think you can handle it?" "Certainly," replied Stuart. "But won't everybody stop and stare at such a small automobile?" "Nobody will be able to see you or the car," replied Dr. Carey. "Why not?" asked Stuart. "Because this car is thoroughly modern. It's not only noiseless, it's invisible. Nobody can see it." "I can see it," said Stuart. "Push that little button," said the doctor. Instantly, the car vanished. "Push it again," said the dentist. "I can't see it," replied Stuart. "Then feel for it." Stuart pushed what felt like the same button. "Watch out! You push the starter button," yelled the doctor. "She's away, loose in the room." Neither he nor Stuart could see the car, yet it was rushing all over the room, bumping into things. The doctor placed Stuart up on a table where he wouldn't be hit by the runaway car. With each crash, the doctor reached for the spot where the sound had come from. But though he was quick, he'd miss, and there'd be another crash someplace else. "Oh, mercy, mercy," Stuart cried when he saw what he had done. "Get a butterfly net," called the doctor. "I can't," Stuart yelled. "I'm not big enough." Dr. Carey went to the fireplace, pressed the proper button, and there it stood again. Its front axle tree detached, its windshield shattered, and quite a bit of the red paint scratched. What a mess, groaned the doctor. I'm sorry, dreadfully sorry, said Stuart. Stuart, I hope this will be a lesson to you. Never push a button on an automobile unless you are sure of what you are doing. Yes, sir, answered Stuart, who was already homesick, and his eyes filled with tears, each tear being smaller than a drop of dew. He was sure he was never going to see Margalo again. Then the doctor told Stuart he was certain he could make the necessary repairs on the car. By early the next morning, Dr. Carey had the car all ready to go, and Stuart started out right away to avoid traffic. He thought it would be a good idea to get out on the road before there were too many cars. The mists of spring mornings hung in the early light as Stuart drove through Central Park, his little car purring along smoothly in the sparse traffic. As often as possible, Stuart searched the trees for Margalo, recalling their past joyous times together in sweet, silent thought. Of course, he constantly kept an eye out for danger. Reminded of the snowbells in the world, Stuart decided to leave the wilds of Central Park and cross over to the West Side Highway. The tenderest greens of spring and palest pastel blossoms repeatedly burst on his sight as he drove north toward the George Washington Bridge. Stuart's car ran beautifully along the open Sawmill River Parkway, and although people in passing cars were inclined to stare at him and smile, Stuart didn't mind. He continued driving right along. He was very careful not to press the button which had caused so much trouble the day before. During his northward travels, Stuart considered each town through which he drove as the possible site of Margalo's new home. When he approached the village of Ames Crossing, it seemed to him the finest town he had ever seen. Margalo would like it here, he thought to himself. The houses were white and high, and the trees were green and higher than the houses, and the wide yards were bushy and worth finding out about. The places where people think about God reached high into the upper air. In this loveliest town of all towns, Stuart felt free and uncrowded. Driving up in front of the general store, he called out to the storekeeper on the front steps. Have you any sarsaparilla in your store? I've got a ruinous thirst. Certainly, gallons of it. Sarsaparilla, root beer, birch beer, ginger ale, Pepsi-Cola, Dipsy-Cola, Popsi-Cola, raspberry cream tonic, anything you want. Let me have a bottle of sarsaparilla, please, said Stuart. While the storekeeper went back into the store for the drink, Stuart waited, enjoying the feeling of being in a new place on a fine day. This was the most peaceful and beautiful spot he had found in all his travels. It seemed to him a place he would gladly spend the rest of his life in, if it weren't that he might get homesick for the sights of New York and his family. And if it weren't for the fact that something deep inside him made him want to find Margalo. When Stuart saw the storekeeper returning with a sarsaparilla, he rushed up the front steps to meet him. Here you are, the storekeeper said kindly to Stuart, then sat down to join him on the steps. That's very refreshing, remarked Stuart. There's nothing like a long, cool drink in the heat of the day when you're traveling. Are you going far? Asked the storekeeper. Perhaps very far, replied Stuart. I'm looking for a bird named Margalo. You haven't seen her, have you? I can't say I have, he said. Say, how tall are you? You mean in my stocking feet, asked Stuart. Yes. 5 inches, nothing and a quarter, answered Stuart. I haven't been measured recently, however. I may have shot up a bit. There's someone in this town you ought to meet, said the man. Well, that's very kind of you, replied Stuart, but I'm not much of a society man these days. The highways and the byways are where you'll find me, always looking for Margalo. Which reminds me, it's time I was on my way. Stuart called goodbye to the storekeeper and drove off. He turned left onto a dirt road and headed down toward the river. Stuart drove toward a cool, quiet spot on the riverbank. The bank ended in leafy woods, and the woods climbed a hill and disappeared over the top toward the wonderful wide sky. The water flowed quietly until it was rudely interrupted by the work of farmers. Evening came, and Stuart still lingered by the stream. After a light supper of a cheese sandwich and a drink of water, he sat down to sleep in the warm grass with the gentle sound of the stream in his ears. In the morning, the sun rose warm and clear. Already the birds were beginning to stir, making friendly sounds in the branches overhead. Stuart never let a bird pass without looking to see if it was Margalo. Stuart felt refreshed and glad to be on the move again. His car purred along smoothly. In the early morning light, Stuart saw a man seated in thought by the side of the road. So he steered his car alongside, stopped and asked, "You're worried about something, aren't you?" "Yes, I am," said the man. "Can I help you in any way?" Stuart asked in a friendly voice. "Well," continued the man, "I'm principal of School 7, and I've got to hire a substitute for a sick teacher who may have rhinestones. I just can't find another teacher." "I'll be glad to take her place for a day," suggested Stuart. "Do you think you can maintain discipline?" asked the principal. "Of course," said Stuart. "I'll make the work interesting, and the discipline will take care of itself. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." The principal thanked him and said he'd meet Stuart at School 7 in half an hour. At 9:15, the scholars gathered in School 7. The news had traveled fast, and everyone knew they were to have a substitute and a rest from their teacher for at least a day. And they were going to have the wonderful experience of being taught by a strange teacher whom nobody had ever seen before. "Let me have your attention," Stuart said to the children from the top of the desk. "As you know, your teacher is sick, and I am taking her place. Is anybody absent?" Fine. What's the first subject you usually take up? "Mathematics," said Lydia Lacey. "Let's skip that. Instead of taking up any special subject, wouldn't it be a good idea if we just talked about something?" "How many of you know what's important?" "Very good," said Stuart. "Henry Rackmeyer, you tell us what's important." "The way the back of a baby's neck smells if its mother keeps it tidy," answered Henry. "Correct. But what did Henry forget?" "Ice cream with chocolate sauce on it," said Mary Bendix. "Exactly," said Stuart. "Now, can anyone suggest any good laws for the world?" "Nix on swiping anything," stated John Poldowski. "Never poison anything but rats," said Anthony Brindisi. "That's no good," said Stuart. "It's unfair to rats. A law has to be fair to everybody. From a rat's point of view, poison is objectionable. A chairman has to see all sides to a problem. Any other ideas for laws?" "Absolutely no being mean," stated Mildred Hoffenstein. "Well, that won't work. Some people are just naturally mean," Herbert Pendergast remarked. I'm not saying it'll work, said Stuart. It's a good law, and we'll give it a try right now. Somebody do something mean to somebody. Harry? Harry, you do something mean to Catherine. Wait a minute now. What's that you've got in your hand, Catherine? Ah, it's a little pillow stuffed with sweet balsam. And does it say, for you I pine, and for you I balsam on it? Catherine said, yes. I suppose you love it very much. Yes, I do, said Catherine. Grab it, Harry. Take it away. Hold it, Stuart said fiercely. Harry broke 2 laws. No swiping and no being mean. Let's get Harry. The children crowded around him while Stuart demanded he give up the pillow. Harry looked scared, although he knew it was just a test case. He gave Catherine the little pillow. She was very pleased to have it back. You see, no being mean is a perfectly good law, said Stuart, breathless from the exertion of being chairman of the world. It had taken a good deal more energy than he had imagined. Let me see that little pillow a minute, said Stuart, as he thought what a fine, sweet-smelling bed it would make for him. He began to want it himself. You don't want to sell it, do you? Asked Stuart. Oh, no, it was a present to me, replied Catherine. I suppose it was given to you by a boy you knew at Lake Hoptakong last summer. And it reminds you of him, murmured Stuart dreamingly. Yes, said Catherine, blushing. You're sure you don't want to sell that little pillow? Stuart persisted. Catherine shook her head. Don't know as I blame you, replied Stuart quietly. Summertime is important. It's like a shaft of sunlight or a note in music. Never forget your summertimes, my dears, he said. Well, I've got to be going along. It's been a pleasure to know you all. Class is dismissed. Stuart strode rapidly to the door and with a final wave of the hand, drove off in a northerly direction, while the children raced alongside and screamed, "Goodbye! Goodbye!" They all wished they could have a substitute every day. Half a mile out of town, the road forked. One road seemed to continue north. The other road seemed to go east. Stuart decided to stop to look the situation over. To his surprise, there was a man climbing down a telephone pole. The man wore spurs on his legs. He also wore a heavy leather belt. And Stuart realized that he must be a repairman for the telephone company. "Good morning," said Stuart. "It's going to be a fine day." "Yes," agreed the repairman, "a fine day. I'm looking forward to climbing my poles." "By the way," said Stuart, "do you ever see birds at the tops of your poles?" "Yes, I see birds in great numbers," replied the telephone man. "Well," said Stuart, "if you run across a bird named Margalo, I'd appreciate it if you dropped me a line. Here's my card." "Describe the bird," said the repairman. "Coco," said Stuart. "Coco with a cold blue necklace at her bosom." "Know where she comes from?" asked the man. "She comes from fields once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. She comes from vales of meadowsweet, and she loves to whistle." "I'll keep my eyes open," the repairman promised. Stuart thanked him. Then the man asked, "Which direction are you headed?" "I rather expect that from now on, I shall be traveling north until the end of my days," said Stuart. "There's something about north," said the repairman, "something that sets it apart from all other directions. A person who is heading north is not making any mistakes, in my opinion. Following a broken telephone line north, I have come upon some wonderful places," he continued. "Swamps where cedars grow and frogs wait, but not for anything in particular. hidden ponds where mother ducks silently teach their obedient young to swim. While chipmunks stand sentry high overhead. Spruce woods on winter days where the snow lay soft and deep. A perfect place for a carnival of rabbits in spring. I know fresh lakes in the north, undisturbed except by fish. And of course, by the telephone company. I know all these places well. They're a long way from here. Don't forget that. And the person who is looking for something doesn't travel very fast. That's perfectly true, said Stuart. Well, I guess I'd better be going. Thank you for your friendly remarks. Not at all, said the repairman. I hope you find that bird. Stuart descended the hill, climbed into his car, and started toward the road that led north. As he left his old world forever to find the beckoning new one, he suddenly realized that goodbye means hello. Although the way seemed long, the sky was bright, and he somehow felt he was headed in the right direction.